today. I've been in international shipping for over 20 years, and I'm really excited to have this conversation with everybody here. So we'll just give it just another couple of seconds just to let everybody in. We've got a really big, great group of people that are going to be joining us on the webinar as well as live online as well. So I need to get that all sorted out on my end as well. And I think we'll get started now. So hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar and live stream today, all about transportation, which is a topic near and dear to my heart as I spent most of my career on the 3PL side. We have an amazing group of supply chain professionals with us today as we navigate the current shipping environment and what you need to know about international shipping now and into the future. My name is Sarah Barnes-Humphrey, and I am the founder and host of Let's Talk Supply Chain and CEO of Ships. I will be your moderator today, and we will be taking questions throughout the discussion, both on the webinar in the Q&A section and through our live streams on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. So be sure to comment, send us your thoughts and your questions so that we can address them as we go. So let's get to know our panelists for today, starting with Viknesh. Tell us who you are, what you do, and what keeps you up at night when it comes to international shipping right now.
Thanks, Sarah, and the team at Let's Talk Supply Chain for hosting this webinar and inviting me to the panel discussion. It's great to be here. Well, talking about myself, I've been in the logistic and supply chain industry for the last 25 years. Time does fly in the logistic industry, as we all know. I started my career as a management trainee and then moved on to various positions in operation and then the whole supply chain industry, management roles. And I had the opportunity to work at various countries across the world and permanently moving to the US in 2002. I started in the US as a trade lane development manager and currently heading the strategy and business development for Apex for the Eastern region. Awesome. Well, what keeps me at night is the industry itself, as we all know. It's a 24/7 industry, and we don't get a break. But also one of the main things is making sure, based on our performance and dedication we have for the industry, monitoring shipments and making sure the origins are doing what they're supposed to do and shipments are moving smoothly and finding solution. That's one of the main things which keeps me at night. Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think it's keeping us all up at night. Oliver, let's turn it over to you. Tell us who you are, what you do, and what keeps you up at night right now.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. So my name is Oliver Huber. I'm responsible for global transportation at Lutron Electronics. We are a manufacturer of high-end lighting solutions, as well as window shade solutions in the commercial and residential space. I've been in the international transportation field for close to 30 years. Originally, I'm a native of Germany, Hamburg, Germany. Lived in the US for about 30 years, had various roles within large freight forwarding companies, and now working for a manufacturer. And so I was thinking about the first question of what keeps me awake, and it really is that the contingency planning, creating playbooks for various different supply chain models is in fact really playing itself out in real time. Right? I mean, we've seen so many different changes between tariffs and Brexits and now COVID and many other supply chain dynamics that the contingency planning is one which needs to be a real playbook. You need to be able to execute it across your entire organization, all functional groups, do so with speed and accuracy, and do it flawlessly in a way that you can still deliver your products to your customers. So, vanilla folders on the shelf are actively and live, and so very challenging for our organization, for any organization.
Yeah, and it's so true. I mean, there's so many different things that have come out of what's happening right now, and so many different things that we need to shed some light on. And I think that was a really good one. So Alan, tell us who you are, what you do, and what keeps you up at night.
Okay, well, thank you, Sarah. I'm actually very excited to be here. So I'm Alan Chester. I'm responsible for all the global transportation, both domestic and international, for Williams-Sonoma, plus all of our indirect sourcing. I've been in the industry for 35 years. In fact, I actually started on the supplier side and worked on that side for probably my first 18 years, including working and living over in Singapore. And then I came over to the other side, and today I'm with Williams-Sonoma. We are a specialty retailer of home furnishings. So we have brands Williams-Sonoma, Pottery Barn, West Elm, Rejuvenation, Mark and Graham. So what keeps me up at night? Really, right now, it's the unknown. I mean, Oliver, really kind of set it up really well. I mean, we've had COVID, we've had Brexit, we've had, the tariff and the trade wars, and this constant changing and need to change of the supply chain, having this highly flexible supply chain and dealing with all of these different curveballs that really, as Oliver said, in all your contingency plan, you almost can't plan for some of these things because, who would have thought we would be where we are right now dealing with COVID?
Yeah.
And so that is what keeps me up.
And being agile, I guess, right? Being on your toes all the time and having to be agile and moving in different directions at all times. So
Correct.
let's kick off the discussion with the international shipping landscape pre-COVID. What were the risks and challenges that shippers were facing prior to this? I know Alan just mentioned some of it with, Brexit and tariffs and all sorts of things. So Viknesh, why don't you start us off with that? What did it look like pre-COVID before we get into everything that's going to happen now and into the future?
Right. So as Alan mentioned, the tariff already started to happen, and then the IMO on the ocean front. So that's one of the things, that is the challenge we have been also facing, I would say, pre-COVID. Yeah.
And what about you, Oliver? What were you seeing pre-COVID from an international shipping standpoint?
Yeah, so we spent, probably a better part of 2 to 3 years on defining our global strategic partnership structure with vendors, transportation companies, and thinking through what that means to us. So our business model is highly customer-centric, very, very focused on predictability, working with companies who have capabilities from a capacity perspective to flex up and down in the market, who are very relationship-centric. We are a relationship company. Our customers are relationship-driven, and so we want to partner with organizations, with freight forwarding companies, et cetera, logistics companies who have a very similar kind of cultural setup in itself. So we spend a lot of time identifying the leading companies in that specific space globally, and then subsequently created relationships, one of which is with Viknesh's organization, with Apex, which has been very beneficial for us, particularly on the Trans-Pacific trade, where we expedite a lot of movements. And so within that, you have to have that sort of relationship that when times are stressful and capacity is heavily constrained, that you can rely on a relationship that is based on forecasting, on clarity, on collaboration, etc. Right? And so in addition to that, we've established foreign trade zones in China and planning really pre-COVID on how to mitigate against some of the North American tariff issues, which have really changed our budgeting structure from 2019 to 2020, and now really how to service our EU 27 customers post-Brexit, right? And so all of those infrastructures we've played with quite a bit, and again, selecting global transportation partners that have capabilities across all those segments is what we've spent a lot of time on, and ultimately try to mitigate against the significant impact to budgets and bottom lines. Particularly on the tariff side.
Yeah, well, and especially, trusting and relying on the information that they're giving to you in real time, especially as these things are coming up, right? It's not like we could really predict what was happening in some of these cases. Sometimes we have a little bit more time because we're told in advance that, things are happening, but when COVID happens, when tariffs happen, when things like that come up, it's really, really important to be able to have that partnership and really trust the communication that goes back and forth as well. So then COVID happens. And international shipping is shaken up even more. So what have the last 2 months looked like for Williams-Sonoma? What were your top priorities when it came to inventory, shipping, and how you reached the end consumer? This is a loaded question, I know, but
yeah, it is.
Really looking forward to your perspective on this.
Well, it's been a roller coaster, and the priorities have changed as we've kind of seen what the world was like for us to operate in COVID. So when COVID first hit, we probably did what a lot of other companies did. We were very proactive in closing 660 of our stores, and they've been only recently opening up. And so what did that mean from an inventory standpoint? You realize, for us, although we're a very large e-commerce company, well over 52% of our product is sold online, you still had, 40+% going through this channel that no longer existed. So we started slowing down POs, and we didn't cancel, we just pushed out POs. And so you had that. And then, of course, I'm responsible on the domestic side. We had shutting down your whole delivery network to the stores, and you had inventory in transit. And how do you pull the inventory back when it's in transit as it went through different channels, such as pool providers or, through UPS, who we use for some of our store deliveries. And then you had the whole idea of you have shipments on the water that now are for retail, that where are you going to put them?
Yeah.
Because your DCs, usually operate 85, 90%, and now you got all these containers coming in. So we actually went out and secured a lot of additional yard space and kind of locked up a lot of different marketplaces early on and held on to them. We're paying even before the product came in. And then what we found as COVID came, we were very fortunate as a company. We did not shut down, and as if anyone follows us on the stock, you saw that, in our first quarter, we actually grew 2.5% in spite of 660 stores being shut down. And so then that changed the whole world too, because you had product that was destined for retail that I know we run, an omni-channel and share inventory. You had to quickly move that because some of the DCs weren't the same. So you were transferring product back and forth between some of the DCs in order now to meet this enormous growing demand in the e-commerce. And then you had to make sure, of course, you're working with your partners to ensure they have the capacity to handle that increased demand. So, every day it's changed, and we have different, challenges. I mean, even including the early ones of, very focused on our employees and safety of our employees, and, buying thermal scanners that, like at the airport, and putting them up in our DCs so you can read people as they came in, temperatures they came in, requiring masks. And I'm also responsible for indirect sourcing, so my whole indirect sourcing team's focus changed from driving out cost in just general buying packages to how do I get, PPE items. Right. And how do you get them to the DCs, and how do you continue sourcing those? And in fact, Viknesh, and we give a lot of credit to Apex, proactively came to us and said, look, we can help you source this, and we even have vendors you can source for. Fortunately, we had that already done, but that was one of the great things about using Apex as a vendor, because they reached out to us outside their normal scope and said, we can help you here.
Well, yeah. And just sort of coming together in that collaborative nature and understanding, it really comes down to understanding the customer, right? And what your needs are. And, of course, your partner's on the international shipping side, but if you're in need of PPE as well, and they can help you with that, really being that partner to be able to help you do that too, right? Alan, do you have anything to add to that? I mean, we talked kind of pre-COVID, but I didn't really ask you what your thoughts were. Oh, sorry, Oliver. I was going to ask Oliver.
Yeah.
Sorry, I asked you pre-COVID, but what were your thoughts on sort of, as COVID was happening?
Very similar than what Alan described. I mean, I think so. One of the things is we were blessed that Lutron has been deemed an essential business. So we continued to manufacture throughout. And so the very first thing was to keep particularly our employees who were in the manufacturing facilities safe. And what did that mean? And this was pre-mandates by states or local governments, right? So we implemented very quickly all of the standards and beyond to make sure that people felt comfortable to really being able to go, come into the facilities and manufacture products. So that was safety and health of our our employees most important. But then with that, so many different challenges. So if you think about a work cell where we manufacture one of our devices, and typically you maybe have within 10 feet, maybe 10 people who sort of work and build a component. Well, now you got to do the same work and do that with maybe 3 or 4 people with social distancing, right? And so so many different challenges from a manufacturing perspective. We've managed through it, and we did really well. Different things, very similar to what Alan said, as is in the US, right? I mean, touch and go. Each state was, touch and go in terms of, well, will we be able to operate in Pennsylvania, for example, tomorrow or the next day? And if not, now what? And then so where will we go? And, what other states in the US are maybe less likely to have an aggressive position because of weather conditions or what have you. So playing through all of those things, very interesting times. The other thing I would say is we were fortunate that our retail channel was very active, or is very active throughout the beginning and still through COVID. So sales is up, and what that really meant is that we've become an even better customer for Apex because we've expedited significant volumes to satisfy our customer demand, and so within that, we stayed out of the spot market. And as I'll point that out for just a moment, because I talked a little bit earlier about strategic partnerships and we can have in-depth conversations around it. But we believe that this was not the time to go into a market and hackle over, do you pay $12 or $13 or whatever per kilo? It's more so predictability and satisfying your customer orders. And so we worked really closely, particularly out of China into the North America market with companies like Apex, and we blew our budget out of the sky, but we satisfied our orders. So we did okay so far.
And that's a really good point, and a great segue into my question for Viknesh, because air freight prices are skyrocketing out of China, or at least they were when I was preparing for this. And there's so many restrictions around movement of PPE. Has volume decreased and more customers are looking at shipping goods by ocean freight? What does that look like right now? Like, where are we sitting between air freight and ocean freight and PPE and electronics and things moving?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yes, the rates skyrocketed starting March, and then in April we saw the peaks. The rates went all the way up to $20 a kg on the spot market, and thereafter, beginning of May, it started to drop with the demand, also PPE demand coming down. It was all driven by PPE goods for the necessity and so forth. So it started to drop, and now I think it dropped significantly. And we also see the ocean market has really picked up, and we see a lot of the retailers buying, and the sales have been good than anticipated. So we have seen a huge jump in the capacity in the ocean market. Yep.
Absolutely. And I think, we saw a lot of, I think you saw a lot of movement by air freight in the last couple of months. You've moved several hundred charters, I believe, right?
Yes, we have moved more than 200 charter flights in the last few months for our some certain customers. We on customers' request, and for on our own as well. So try to assist the customers' demand. So we have been very fortunate, and try to make sure that we deliver based on customers' demands.
Yeah, and I think a really important point from that is also that majority of those charters were a lot of PPE, and you were able to deliver PPE to frontline workers globally, which has been a huge initiative for the group over at Apex. Correct?
That's perfectly right. And we also worked with FEMA. We handled a few charters for FEMA as well. Yes, certainly.
Which is great. I mean, obviously, at a time like this, we need companies like you to be able to deliver that PPE to the front lines, which is so very important. And it's not only just the front lines too, right? It's the companies like Allen's and Oliver's that need to protect their employees as well, because we all know, supply chain, logistics, last mile distribution. I mean, we can all, social distance to a point, but we've also got to be able to keep business moving as well. So let's talk about the rest of the year. So we've talked about pre-COVID, we've talked about what it's kind of looked like for you inside COVID, but what does the rest of the year look like? Are you looking to change your transportation strategies? What does that look like exactly? How are you planning for inventory? How are you planning at all? Maybe I'll start with you, Alan.
Sure. So, we see an uptick in volume. As I said before, we really, our sales actually increased during this period. So we anticipate that to continue. So a lot of the orders that we pushed out, we're pulling forward. And so we actually see the volumes, being fairly strong for the remainder of the year. We don't see any real change in our strategy in pre-COVID. I mean, now that we're starting to come out, it's really moving from a mode of reactions to now implementing all of our initiatives, and for us, that's in some ways we were working on changing the way we move product generally. So, traditionally we would bring product in, we would design product, we'd bring it into a DC, and then send it to customers either direct or to the stores. In order to be able to offer a broader array of SKUs, we've worked with suppliers overseas, and Viknesh is one of them, plus our manufacturers. And they actually we have certain SKUs that they will make in a allotted period of time, 2 weeks or less. And then with that, we have, it's an order. So a customer can now order product that is not in our DCs, that hasn't been made yet. The vendor takes that order. 2 weeks later, it's ready to be shipped. They actually apply our 1Z UPS domestic delivery label on it. Viknesh then pulls that out in a Gaylord. He then lifts that, and we clear it while it's wheels up. It delivers through Chicago and into our facility, and then skips the DC and goes direct into our UPS delivery network. So what that does, we're 4 days or less from that time that product leaves Asia until it's in a customer's home. We take advantage of our heavyweight air freight, and we take advantage of our lower ground rates with UPS, and we don't have to take inventory. So that's one of the big projects we've been working over the years, and so we're going to continue to expand that as we move forward. So we're moving out from the highly reactive, what does COVID mean, because we never dealt with anything, to now going back to our initiatives. And we think volume is going to be pretty strong. We actually see more of a change, not on international, but on domestic. And so for someone like us now, during the COVID period, 90% was now e-commerce. And e-commerce made up the difference for most of that retail loss. We see a lot of those customers, not all coming back to retail, to stores. And so we see a new norm potentially in our parcel shipments and our home delivery, where we have two-man delivery teams, where, again, more of it's going to be done online than in stores. Stores are incredibly important to us, and we see stores continuing to play that role, but we still think the customer may have changed a little bit, and some of them that were reluctant to go e-commerce have and like it. And so we think that demand is going to continue, which more impacts our domestic market, or that other service I just showed you, what we call our vendor direct, international vendor direct.
That's a really great initiative. I mean, you're taking advantage of your international logistics partner to be able to consolidate all of those orders, but you're not having to keep the capital intensive inventory in your warehouses for a just in case or just in time, I guess, scenario for when the customer buys it. Yeah,
that's correct. And that's exactly what Apex does for us. They actually deliver Gaylords to our vendors. The vendor has X amount of time to fill that Gaylord. They actually close it. Viknesh comes in once a week, twice a week, depends on which vendor it is. And again, each one of those individual packages in that Gaylord has a UPS 1Z on it. And so when that comes in, it goes direct into a ship sorter and right out. And of course, you lift and you arrive the same day in the U.S. and it's all wheels up clearance.
Wow.
And we do the same thing for ocean, a little different because we do have very large furniture pieces that we do ocean. And again, it just bypasses the DC and goes direct into our delivery network.
Oh, so you do it by ocean as well. That's
Do
fantastic.
both. Yeah.
That's fantastic. What about you, Oliver? How are you planning for the rest of the year?
Yeah, so similar in that as we project sales to be at pre-COVID levels, so healthy across the residential, commercial, and then windows shades solutions. And so a couple of things, right? So one of them is we have distribution centers and fulfillment centers globally, and so I'm thinking through. What kind of inventory should we have in those locations? And should we have in those locations? So, for example, in the US, should we have a couple more than the ones we have? And should we do mass customization in those, or should it just be purely distribution centers? And so modeling through those different alternatives and understanding what the cost to operate is, obviously, but then also what the inventory carrying costs are, what it means ultimately for the customer. Is it merely just a risk mitigation process, or can we actually get faster and better from an order delivery perspective? Answer is probably yes. But so and as I said in my opening comments, it's not only a model, it is something which we're actively looking at from a global perspective to see, how do we make sure that we sustainably can deliver our product to our customers. Again, shades is a little bit different because if you think of window shades, each one is custom order by motor, by fabric, right? There's so many SKUs, thousands of SKUs. So speed to market is a little bit of a different environment there. And so our model is slightly different than our lighting control solution. The other element, which we've spent a lot of time thinking through, is how do we make sure that particularly on the raw material side, that our supplier base is healthy, right? We keep thinking and talking about the trade lanes and capacity and on the water and in the air and on the roads, etc. But what right, this pre-COVID and post-COVID environment, what do the suppliers look like? And so we are going through a very robust health check, if you will, with our suppliers, including obviously transportation companies, to make sure that they are financially sound and that they have a good process in place on how to bring people back after the social distancing made changes or local, right? So, which is that's a very, very important piece to our sustainability on the end of the day. No raw material, no finished product, no orders to the customer, right? And so it's a relatively simple correlation. So we spend a lot of time thinking through that, but then also helping companies who are challenged with that, right? We buy a lot of microprocessors, and so we compete in the automotive and cell industry, right? And so from an inventory perspective, it's you don't buy in bulk necessarily, you buy what you can get, if you will, right? Because there's such a huge demand. And so we're thinking through working with our suppliers on how to have more consignment shipments and those types of things.
And I think that that's a really good point. It's not really, we've kind of been focused on the international shipping and transportation side of it, but also, those relationships with your suppliers. I mean, there's a lot of conversation that's happening around globalization, right? And diverse manufacturing. And, what do we do with the supplier base and what does that look like? But not really have we had that conversation around what is the health of those suppliers. And what are we going to look at moving forward, and who can we move into the future with? And, you've given me a great segue again into my next question, because I want to talk about globalization and what that looks like. Viknesh, I want to send this over to you. So has there been a change in the global landscape of shipping? I mean, we might not see it just yet, but are there discussions happening? Are companies shifting their manufacturing decisions away from China? And if they do, what are some of the risks that they need to be aware of, or maybe some questions they should be asking their suppliers before considering moving some of that export to a different country?
That's a great question, Sarah. We get this question asked all the time. It's as we see, there's a lot of manufacturing moving away, shifting away from China for sure. In certain industries more than the others. It's moving to in the Indian subcontinent and Southeast Asia and even to Africa, we see the shift happening, drastically in certain industries. There are a few difficulties when moving out of China. Is mainly the manufacturing. That China has a huge manufacturing base. So so to move that to a certain place, they are finding it difficult. But I think certain industries are doing it better than the others. For the risk, what are the risks? It will be the main risk will be the sustainability as they move to a new markets and new countries, whether those countries can whether they can sustain the production capabilities, and also with the labor and political climate is one of the main things we see happening. And then the logistic efficiencies.
Mm-hmm.
China, we have faster transit, and we have ocean freight and air freight, huge capacity. But other countries, they have their own challenges. Africa has huge challenges. So as they shift, these are some of the challenges they are facing. And we at Apex, we try to come up with solution to these customers, and one of the things, that's one of the things that we are doing very efficiently is providing solution as the global market is changing.
Yeah. And I think it's going to come up even more, right? I mean, the conversation around globalization is really just starting. COVID has been able to shine the light on some of those gaps and really, I think, forced companies into thinking about where they want to manufacture. And like Oliver said, what those suppliers look like, where you can source those raw materials. But China really is the best kept mass manufacturing secret. I mean, we can't get around that. And it took a long time to get there. So, moving into different countries and taking a look at the logistics and the supplier base and everything like that, it's going to take us some time, I would believe. Do you agree with that, Alan? I mean, I see you nodding.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, we as a company made, our CEO made a decision with the tariffs that we would start reducing our dependency on China. Although China was our largest country, we still were fairly well balanced. They only represented about 40%, 45% of our volume. But it is harder to do than say. And as you said it, you could move your production out of China and go into Vietnam, which already is over capacity, quite honestly, or into places like Cambodia and explore new areas. But China has done such a great job of being vertically integrated, and it's not just the manufacturing, but where they have access to raw materials. Their logistics is built for export. As Viknesh was saying, the transits and times are shorter out of China than out of Cambodia, and so moving it is harder than you think. We've even gone so far because maybe not a lot of people know that, but Williams-Sonoma through its Pottery Barn and West Elm brand, actually we manufacture a large percent of our own upholstery sofas and chairs here in the United States. And so we already had 3 plants that we opened up 13 years ago. But with all the changes, initially with the tariffs, and again you have with COVID and all the other uncertainties, we opened up a third plant in Tupelo, Mississippi. And so not only are we just moving product out of China, we're near, you're putting it closer to where the demand is. So we're doing things like that. But again, it's not that easy, and especially in Oliver brought it with, raw materials and other vendors. China's built for export and mass production. They're the best at it. They really are. So it's harder than everyone thinks, but we are doing it like a lot of other people.
Yeah, and I think the conversation is gonna be going for a while, right? Nearshoring versus offshoring, and all sorts of things like that. So, Oliver, you spoke about sustainability as being a part of what you guys are doing and how you're implementing some of these new processes that have come out of what's happened in the last couple of months. What impact do you see sustainability and localization on your business moving forward?
Yeah, so I think it's a tricky question. Ultimately, you want to try to have your suppliers have raw materials close to your manufacturing location and potentially purchase them on consignments, etc. But those are integral relationships too. And so we have a very healthy and interesting mixture of suppliers. If you think about it, packaging material is relatively easy to localize, right? You can have instruction sheets and printing and cardboard boxes and those types of things. You can purchase that most everywhere else. But so microprocessors, for example, we've talked earlier, right? The manufacturing and supply base is Asia based. Localization is definitely something we strive towards, but we also have a healthy understanding that some products simply can't be localized, and then some companies, some suppliers do not have a logistical organization that they truly, right? So they still could make it in, we make it in Europe, and we manufacture, for example, in Mexico, one of our locations. So they may not be able to be set up to, well, how does imports work? How do legal entities work? Should they be a maquiladora or not, right? All of that work, and so we build in a very collaborative sort of way. We help our supply base, those who we wish to continue to work with, but localize if we can. We help them either connect with logistics companies or we give them guidance in terms of how to still make a product overseas but localize it from a purely from a relationship perspective. But it's a mix, if you will, right? So our window shades, if you think about all the fabrics, we have countless yards of rolls of fabrics, because each order is individual and unique. And so from a supply base perspective, that is all in-house stored from an inventory perspective, made here in the US, right in Virginia. So we talked about localization earlier. We do make US products as well. So
yeah. So what if companies were looking to potentially change suppliers or diversify their supplier base? What would you caution them on, or what questions do you think that should be asked, or that they should consider asking when doing that? Oliver, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, my initial reaction would be is trade compliance. And trade compliance has become such an integral part in managing a supply chain correctly, of all the things that fall into it, in terms of simple things like classifications and then exemptions, and what processes do you have to make sure that's all of that. So trade compliance, to me, thinking about a supplier structure, particularly if they have dual sourcing and make some products maybe in the US and some overseas, and lot control and all those things. What does the compliance structure look like within the supplier? And have a very deep and detailed conversation in that space, which any procurement or purchasing group would probably have anyways. But very important, trade compliance in my view.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and something that doesn't get talked about a lot. Right? It's not something that comes up, especially for small to medium-sized businesses. Mm-hmm. It could get lost. It could be something that, is just not considered at the time. But hearing from you how important it is, it's really something that you should take some time and dig into before you're looking at new suppliers or even changing suppliers. I think that's a great point. Alan, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. The only thing is you're developing new suppliers, and one, can they make the quality of product that you say? Can they adhere to the handover dates and the around assurance of supply? To me, those are probably two of the critical things. When we look at and again, I'm responsible for the indirect. We always look at more than one supplier for any key item. And then when you have that dual source, are the items similar? Right? Is the quality the same, and do they adhere to the delivery dates that you say they can do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, really good points. Really good points.
And I assume when you said supplier, you didn't think about vendors such as Apex. You were thinking about actual suppliers of product.
Yeah.
Right?
I am actually thinking of someone who makes the product.
Okay.
But we do that also we actually do that with Apex too. Just because we like dealing with them, we keep him on his toes and make sure that we RFP him all the time. Viknesh has that sneer, like, yeah, I'm laughing, Alan, but I'm not.
Yeah.
Viknesh, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, Alan, for sure. Alan and Oliver, both of them keep us on our toes for sure.
That's good. That's good. And they should, as customers of
Yes.
international logistics, they absolutely should. And with everything shifting as it is right now, and not really being able to plan, but kind of planning at the same time, I mean, you're going to be on your toes for a little while, I think. So Viknesh, then how is Apex planning to support the customers in these initiatives? Are you thinking about sustainability? Are you thinking about carbon footprint? Are you thinking about different things from a shipping perspective to be able to support your customers like Alan and Oliver on these initiatives?
Yes, we work very closely with most of our customers and companies how to consolidate, maximize the product, getting the right mix, and so forth. So that's one of the things which we are working very closely to consolidate shipments and so forth. So that's one of the initiatives what we are doing with the customers, and also internally within the organization, we are also educating the team and getting the right equipment and the process and service providers of this carbon footprint. We are always checking on that as well. And then Apex is preparing to launch our own carbon emitter for shippers to analyze the impact of their supply chain. The tool will provide information to clients, considering the environment-friendly solution for their supply chain providers. So this is one of the main initiatives we are doing. We have our new CEO, Sean Francisco, and his team have been working on this very diligently. Make sure that we get this right. And
that's a really
and that's a very important part for us and socially responsible thing. But we want to make sure that we get that done.
Yeah, no, that's a great initiative. I mean, supply chain, obviously from a manufacturing perspective, that's where we have the most impact, I think, from a carbon footprint perspective, but obviously all the way through the life cycle of a product as well, from sourcing through the manufacturing process and then all of the transportation in between. How important is the carbon footprint to you guys? I mean, Alan and Oliver, is it something that you're talking about internally? Are you, doing things to reduce it? I mean, obviously being partner with Apex and Viknesh, and then bringing that initiative forward, that's going to be a huge help to that kind of initiative for you.
So for us, it's extremely important. It absolutely is factored into all our decisions. When we look at how we move product, we look at different modes, and we do look at the carbon footprint of the different modes. So we push a lot of product from truckload into, of course, rail, and then we spend a lot of time converting, air to ocean, which is unfortunate for Viknesh. But we absolutely do that, and we evaluate vendors as we're going through the RFP process. Part of that evaluation is what are they doing to improve their carbon footprint. And we have a sustainability team, in the company. We spend a significant amount of time, and transportation is part of that team because, again, as a retailer who manufactures a lot of its products, we spend a lot of time ensuring that we're using wood that are not taken from, old rainforests, certain types of cotton. So transportation is part of those initiatives. So we put a high value on the carbon footprint and what the companies are doing to improve their carbon footprint.
Oliver?
Yeah, very similar. We have a sustainability team. Many of our bids are based on our environmental scores, and carbon footprint is obviously part of it, right? We're in the electrical space, so it's all around energy savings, if you will. So very important to us as an organization. I wanted to add quickly to what Viknesh was describing on how Apex is supporting customers in today's environment. I think another element is to think about partnering with vendors who truly have global capabilities, right? Because we've said that so many things are changing, and we've talked about localization and, right, do you shift manufacturing, and what does that mean from a supply chain? It's really important that beyond just a boutique freight forwarding company or 3PL in itself, that you have somebody who's got the ability to have a global, right, global breadth, global capabilities to flex up and down. To me, a very important element across all service segments from a movement perspective. So.
Well, and a global perspective as well. I mean, think about, the PPE that's been moving and all, like, I've spoken to a lot of people in the industry, and moving PPE right now you'd think would be so easy because people need it, but it's definitely not something that's easy. Viknesh, I know you guys are the leaders in this. You've really moved a lot of PPE. You've been moving a lot of PPE by air freight. You've been a leader in this initiative. Can you tell us a little bit about what's been going on around the restrictions in PPE and what you've been seeing and what you've been facing?
Yeah, I mean, I think initially everyone was, all the shippers, and there was, a lot of shippers were shipping on. There was some even fake PPE goods were shipped. And I think the Chinese government got a wind of it pretty quickly as well, and they put a lot of process and stop to that. So after that, they had put a lot of regulation on the PPE goods movement, and making sure that the right manufactured items are being shipped on the PPE goods. So as of now, I think the demand has really slowed down as most of the countries are, seeing the COVID cases to be, less. So I think that the whole demand is also coming down on the PPE movements.
Awesome. Well, it's been great to see, you guys as a global leader really stepping in and helping out during these times. So before we end off, I'm going to let everybody know in the audience to send me any of your questions. But I want to ask all of you, what is one takeaway each of you would share with the audience today about how they should be looking at their shipping strategies moving forward? Alan, I'm going to start with you, and then I'll go to Viknesh and then Oliver.
Sure. I mean, from our standpoint, the strategy should be one which is highly flexible. You have a very agile supply chain, so you can deal with these constant curveballs that we've been dealing with, and we've been dealing with significant ones over the last few years. I don't think there's been any year over the last 5 years we haven't had something come up that no one would ever have been able to plan for. But also in your strategies, transportation has changed. We now are part of the product characteristics. It's, we now are part of the customer experience, especially in retail. And so you have to have strategies that drive that value to the customers. Everything from driving speed to getting data from your vendors that are now used externally to communicate to your customers of where their product is, because now you have, software solutions that your customer can see where your product is as it moves through the supply chain like a breadcrumb. So that data now is more important than ever before. And again, you're solving complex problems to help drive the customer experience. You're no more a backroom function. You just get it from A to B and it goes into a warehouse. So again, having this highly flexible, predictable, agile marketplace that's focused on driving customer value, and you are directly interacting now as a group and a service to that customer.
It's so true. Partnering for that customer experience and data being a huge part of it. So that's a really good one. Viknesh, send it over to you. What's one takeaway that the audience should be thinking about in their shipping strategies?
So as we talked about, as it moves, from certain origins and so forth. So sustainability is one of the things. I think the main thing we need to talk about, think about, and the partnership and the capacity management and how forecasting and so forth. As Alan mentioned, data is a main thing. We have to be looking at the data, and if as and when the shift happens into different markets and so forth, how to manage that and so forth. That's one of the main things I think the companies have to start looking at it and understanding and educate the internal sourcing team and so forth. Yeah.
Great points. Great points. Oliver?
Yeah, so in closing, I have been telling my global team that logistics and trade compliance has become in many ways the chief information officer team within organizations, right? The interest and the anxiety and the panic these changes have brought about has really put the spotlight on logistics and trade compliance in many organizations. And so in that, I think that's a very good thing, because the seat at the table is definitely here to be had now. But so then within that, I think it really depends on the individual business model of the company people are representing. If you are very focused on predictable service structures and delighting a customer and being all around that, and you have healthy margins, that's one model. And within that, I think selecting service providers globally in a very strategic, methodical, structured way, and picking companies who have the ability to flex up and down, both from a systems, from a service or air, ocean, truck, and all that stuff, compliance, distribution centers, relationships, and people, companies who have the ability to incorporate all of those things. If that fits your corporate culture, which for us it does, then you'll have a better chance of winning when the next curveball will come our way, which will, for us to quickly implement a change in the global supply chain. And so strategically focusing on picking companies in that space, I think is a critical thing to do.
Yeah, and collaboration being part of that strategy moving forward. Okay, just before we go, we've got a couple of audience questions. So from LinkedIn, Sanjeev from San Francisco asks, is there risk of DC storage capacity based on shipping coming back? Are we creating another issue now? Alan, do you want to take that one?
So the answer to that is absolutely. As you shut down their stores, you had to put the product, somewhere, and so DC capacity became an issue. I think as we start coming out of this, at least again, I can only speak for ourselves, where we experienced just the shift in sales, we started to see less DC capacity issues. But going into this, that was one of our primary concerns, was DC capacity. And we, as I stated before, actually were trying to get in front of that and get storage, additional off-site capacity, both DC and also storage yards. And as we got into the COVID and we saw our sales weren't shrinking, that became less of an issue. But generally speaking, yes, we believe DC capacity will be an issue, because a lot of the stores closed and not everyone could push off all their POs.
Yeah. And just in addition to that, I was hearing a lot of product being kept in containers and such, because, there was spring inventory that had come in that couldn't necessarily be pushed out in the stores as they traditionally have. And so you're right. There was definitely a capacity issue, and people were using containers for that storage as well for a number of weeks. I don't know if that's happening still right now, but it was definitely an issue in the last couple of weeks, and something that, we should be looking at moving forward. So I've got an audience question from Manek. Considering the current situation, should a company work to develop a scorecard for risk assessment in shipping, inbound and outbound? What factors should be considered to build something like that? Oliver, do you want to take that one?
Well, the answer is absolutely yes. You should have a risk factor scorecard. Gosh, there's so many different things you could think through in terms of, you're right, the financial, physical, capacity, people, systems. I think it may be too long to go through here, but think of the categories that are important to you as an organization, and then make sure that the scorecard obviously captures all of those elements and then some. And there are many examples you could find that could be the start of a straw man in terms of what to incorporate in that process.
Great. And I'm sure they can always, link up with you on LinkedIn as well and
Sure.
reach out to you there and potentially
Of course.
ask you some more on that. And then finally, one more question from LinkedIn. Mohammed says, how do you see COVID-19 impact and the change in consumer behavior at the global supply chain level? Who wants to take that? Alan, Oliver? Viknesh?
I don't. That's a tough one. I think the biggest. I think the biggest change really is the change in the consumer buying behavior. As I kind of talked about a little bit before, I think you're going to get a shifting more of a shifting to e-commerce. I really do. So you have to have a transportation network that's built to handle, a strong e-commerce marketplace. I think a lot of customers who historically went to store were maybe a little reluctant to go e-commerce, had to, because that's the only way you could get product. And I think, the benefits of shopping, there's clearly benefits to shopping e-commerce, especially convenience. And I think a lot of those customers are going to continue that. And that's not just the United States. We saw that globally in our operations in Europe and also in Australia. So I think you're going to have a change in consumer buying patterns.
Yeah,
I would add to it is I think the other big element to consider is the unknown on the unemployment levels from a global perspective, right? And if they stay where they are, how long does it take, regions and countries and people to recover to consume at the same levels than before? I think that's a little bit of the unknown as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and definitely something we should consider moving forward. So there's a lot to consider moving out of COVID and into our new normal. Taking a holistic approach to your international shipping strategies and looking at ways for your internal business units to collaborate will be the key to success in any business. It's not just about price anymore, but about the transit time, the carbon footprint, the upstream and the downstream impacts, and included in all of those will only benefit you moving forward. Thank you to Apex Logistics for driving this conversation. And if you don't know, they have moved 150 million pieces of PPE to front lines globally over the last few months. Thank you for your contribution. And if you would like more info about them, check out episode 116 at Let's Talk Supply Chain and at their website, apexglobe.com. Plus, you can chat with them directly on their channel inside the Procurement Foundry. Thank you to everybody for joining us today. Thank you to Alan and Oliver for joining us and sharing your insights, as well as Viknesh today. Thank you, everyone online and in the webinar, for making us a part of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.